Hello and welcome. This is Lita Downs from the Center for Faculty Excellence, and I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, Accelerating Students' Progress Through Personalized, Contextual, and Predictable Prospectus Feedback. Our presenters on the line today are Dr. Al Andres and Dr. George Bradley. They both presented this information live at the 2019 National Faculty Meeting in National Harbor, Maryland this past summer. It's great to have them both on the line today, and at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Andres. Welcome.
Thank you, Lita. I'm going to, in the proverbial sense, tell you what I'm going to tell you, tell it to you, and then tell you what I told you. So in that spirit, let's discuss, first of all, what I'm going to tell you. And George and I will tell you, Dr. Bradley. I'm Al Andres, by the way. I'm the serve within the DBA program as the lead prospectus reviewer, a core faculty member, and occasional URR reviewer as well. As far as what we're going to be covering today, we're going to be discussing what is the prospectus, why, and what are the principal contents of the prospectus. Secondly, in order to meet those the purpose and the contents of the prospectus, well, here's some key resources, or what I refer to as accelerators for students with progress. So they and the committee are not going around the proverbial Ferris wheel without any stop points in sight, except for completing a job well done. Third, most common improvement opportunities based upon multiple hundreds, literally hundreds of reviews of prospecti over the last couple of years. And what did we find as the most, what I refer to as always, the vital few improvement opportunities to save time and accelerate progress. And penultimately, or second to last, some ideas for personalizing your feedback and making it contextual and predictable for consistency as well. And then what did we say? Well, we're going to wrap it up with a summary. Next slide, please. With respect to the purpose and contents of the prospectus, purpose is essentially to provide what referred to a plan, or I refer to it as a foundation for developing a successful proposal. So it's a stepping stone, if you will, for building that successful proposal, but a strong basis, foundation for proceeding as such. The DBA prospectus contains the following principal headings. As you see there, what's the nature of the problem? Why is it important? What are we going to, in the purpose statement, how are we going to address addressing the problem there? With what design, what method and design are we going to use to address a specific business problem? What's the nature of the study? How are we going to go about it in terms of the method and the specific design we've chosen? And equally important, why didn't we choose other methods or other designs instead of what we're proposing? And for the qualitative prospecti, what interview questions are we going to use? And for the both qualitative and quantitative, what's a research question on which the interview questions stem, as well as what are the null and alternative hypotheses for determining the answers to those research questions in terms of significance or non-significance of variables. But ultimately, again, what's the basis for our studies framework? Is it conceptual for a qualitative study, or theoretical for a quantitative study? What theories, what variables stem from those theories, and conceptual as well. What are the principal constructs that underline our framework that we'll be using to identify and understand our results? And finally, why is this study significant from both a business perspective as well as a change perspective, affecting cultural change as well? Significance from both of those dimensions. All right. Key resources or accelerators that we found useful for all programs. For all programs, there's a very useful link that contains both documents and videos for across the programs. And then for the DBA specific links, you'll see the specific key resources that we use. For example, the Prospectus guide that contains links to videos for each of the headings that we've just discussed. The rubric and handbook that contains both further guidance on those areas as well as within the handbook examples for each of those areas. And for the template, starting with the title page, what are expected contents of the title page, ranging from including the date that you expect the CAO, Chief Academic Officer, to sign off on your completed study. Just not the prospectus, but your completed study. That's what that date should reflect. Next slide, please. With respect to the qualitative problem statement, here's some common improvement opportunities that we've seen across multiple prospectus. Instead of using peer-reviewed and or government publication in the problem statements hook and our anchor, not using perhaps magazines or reports, company reports that are not peer-reviewed. And a good starting point determining whether or not something is comes from a peer-reviewed journal is Ulrich's website. Good starting point. Not sufficient always, because sometimes Ulrich will list something or have it not available as not being peer-reviewed. But if you go to the actual web page for the home of the journal, you'll see that yeah, we use a double-blind, peer-reviewed process for the acceptance or denial of acceptance for articles. So Ulrich's is a useful starting point, but not always sufficient. Secondly, not verifying that those elements, hook, anchor, general and specific problems, align. They have to think in the context of a funnel. You start with a problem, general problem area within the hook with a peer-reviewed citation or government publication. And then the intensity or the importance of that problem is reflected in the anchor that stems from the hook. And then the general business problem states across multiple organizations, this has been found important gap that has to be addressed by this specific business problem that managers within the fast food industry lack strategies to address employee turnover, chronic employee voluntary turnover issues. And again, funnel from the very broad problem area down to the specific business problem. And then not verifying that the specific business problem's wording aligns with the first sentence, typically, first sentence of the purpose statement and the research question. So those three items, specific business problem, purpose statement, and the research questions, use the same wording. So it's good just to essentially copy and paste from one to the other with any minor modifications that you deem necessary. Next question, please. All right, slide. For the purpose statement, After you identify within the first sentence what method and design you expect to use for addressing the specific business problem, you're going to identify the number for a case study, multiple case study of the organizations that will comprise your case study and the population who within each of those organizations will, in fact, you'll be interviewing as one source of data. And then secondly, not specifying that those organizations and those participants whom you'll be interviewing have been successful in addressing that specific business problem. We will often see that I'm going to be interviewing fast food managers who have been in business for at least 5 years. Well, that doesn't say that they've been successful in addressing voluntary turnover, have strategies that they've developed and implemented that have resulted in reducing voluntary turnover. And last and most common is not providing a sufficient explanation of how and why you expect your study to affect general beneficial social change. Instead of that, focusing on business benefits versus who and how can the who benefit in addition to the organization and its employees. Who else can benefit? For example, if the organization is successful in becoming profitable, those profits can be used to support nonprofit organizations within local communities for the benefit of citizens of those communities. Next slide, please. George?
Okay, hello everyone. My name is George Bradley, and I am an academic coordinator over the portfolio capstone, and I review the quantitative prospectus in the DBA program. Problem and purpose statement, quantitative, common improvement opportunities. The first bullet deals with the dependent and the criterion variable, which is the outcome variable. And be mindful that when we're writing about our hook and our anchor, it should be about the dependent variable. It should be about the dependent variable, not the independent variables or the predicted variables, but it should be about the independent variable of the dependent variable. And that's one of the common mistakes that we see there. Bullet 2, not identifying each predictor independent variable. In the DBA program, we need a minimum of 2 predicted variables. We should have 2 or more. One does not meet the DBA requirement. Not stating an independent predicted variable before the dependent variable. When we write our hypothesis, our specific business problem, and our research questions, we need to write the independent or the predicted variables first. We normally write those in time order. Be mindful that in our purpose statement, when we're identifying our independent variables, we need to make sure that we break each one down and that we talk about each one. An example is leadership. Leadership can be an independent variable, but there are different components. We need to know about each component, and you should write about each component. That gives the reviewer an opportunity so we can assess the sample size of the student's work. Next slide. Right here we have an activity. Please read the activity. Put the computer on pause and read the activity, and when you're finished, put it on play, and we will review some of the information that you presented. Next slide. Let's put the slide before that. Some of the common problems as it pertains to our social change as you read this activity is the first sentence, you have too many ideas. Another, it is not clear how promoting awareness and cognition is related to social change. And from our audience, we had a response that the author needs to show how increased return in oil investment translates to societal benefit. Next slide. The nature of the study. The nature of the study in Prospectus starts and it identifies the method and the design, and we write a paragraph on each one. One of the common opportunities here is to make sure that we focus, if we're working with quantitative, that we identify and with peer review citations, identify why we're using quantitative method and why we didn't use a qualitative or a mixed method. And one of the common mistakes that we see is omitting why we chose a mixed method. The paragraph with design. The design is our roadmap, and we discuss why we're using different designs. The correlation relates to quantitative, ethnographic, qualitative, experimental, quantitative, narrative, qualitative, and or phenomenological designs. We need to explain why we're using each one and why we didn't use any of the others. Omitting why a single or multiple case study design is being used, we should make sure that we explain that and have clarity to it. And the quantitative correlational design, make sure that we don't use the word correlation. Correlation is a statistical test, and correlational is a quantitative research design. Next slide. Al?
All right, thank you, George. With respect to continuing improvement opportunities in interview questions, the two most common improvement opportunities are the interview questions do not align with the research question, and that typically results in what we refer to as scope creep beyond what the stated purpose of the study is and the focus for the research question, or phrasing the interview questions that as opposed to having open-ended questions, using closed-ended questions that prompt simple yes or no responses from the respondents. Examples here you can see is the research question is, what communication crisis management strategies do public relations professionals use to note assist organizations in planning for and recovering from a crisis, planning for or recovering from a crisis? And the actual proposed interview questions that were listed is, you can see, number one, how can other organizations seek ways to improve their abilities for, note the word, preventing a crisis? So in fact, the focus here is on preventing a crisis versus what the research question is, planning for a crisis, recovering from a crisis. And the other compound improvement opportunity here is other organizations focus versus the focus for the particular organizations that constitute the population element for your study. And then look at the second IQ. Are there any other topics? The phrasing of that is amenable to yes, no responses. And how would you address this? You could say, for example, what other topics that we didn't cover would you like to discuss relative to the research question, addressing the research question? Okay, next.
Quantitative research question. The theory, the theoretical framework, the independent variables or the predicted variables are aligned with the theory. As you can see with the blue, with the color blue, those are the independent variables. And as you can see, we have more than one independent variable. And the red, you have the dependent variable. The dependent variable, which is the outcome variable, is our problem, and our independent variables align with the theory. Our second bullet, educational guess. Educational guess is a deep study of the literature so that you come up with your research question. Be mindful that the purpose of any research is to make sure, is to answer the research question. Next slide. Okay, right here, the hypotheses, we have two. We have our null hypothesis, which means no or not, and our alternate that should be aligning with the research that we're conducting. The hypothesis of no significant relationship, that aligns with correlational design. No effect aligns with experimental, and no difference aligned with the design causal and comparative. And the alternate hypothesis always is there is a significant relationship, effect, or different. As you can see in the example, the null, there is no relationship between. Then you name your independent variables. As you can see in the parentheses there, that shows the theory that it aligns with, which is the job demand model, and the comma separates each independent variable, and the and will lead you to the dependent variable. No is in null, and there is a relationship between emotional demand interaction and the other independent variables and the job satisfaction, which is your dependent variable. Next slide. Next slide, we have the conceptual framework, which is qualitative. With our theoretical and our conceptual framework, but with our conceptual framework, we have 5 components there. We have identifying the theory or the conceptual framework. We have the author. We have the date. We also have, we have to write about the different constructs of the theory or the conceptual framework. And number 5, how the theory or the conceptual framework aligns with our actual problem. The last sentence that you have there, the proposed conceptual framework, will be discussed in section 3 of the completion of the study. Our concept, once we have our themes and our findings, one of the first things we do in the actual latter part of section 3 is to see how our themes align with our conceptual framework. The conceptual framework can be a theory or it can be a developed concept, but it needs to align with the problem. Next slide. Right here, theoretical framework. The theoretical framework, as I said before, must align with the independent or the predicted variables. As you've seen in the example, all 3 of the independent variables align with the job demand model. That's not always how it works. You might have disjointed where you have other independent variables that have a different theory. If they have different theories, you have to identify all of the theories in your theoretical framework. But the theoretical framework has to align with the independent and predicted variables in a correlational study. Next slide. Right here, we have an activity that we want you to take the time to read, Hertzberg's two-factor theory. Please mute your computer, please mute, and after you have read this material, especially pay attention to the two factors and the constructs or the variables that relate with them. Please turn it on and move to the next slide and respond to the questions of number 2 of this activity. Next slide. Number 2, the topic is employees' intent to leave an organization. And that is your problem. That is your dependent variable. The first bullet, there were several in the Hertzberg theory, Hertzberg two-factor theory, that could be predicted variables. You would have to use more than 2, and it would have to be predicated on the research. But I use the 3: recognition of one's achievement, opportunities to do something meaningful, and work conditions. Those were the 3 independent, the predicted variables that I use from Hertzberg two-factor theory. As I said before, intent to leave is the problem. I'm gonna propose research question from the 3 that I use. What is the relationship between recognition of one's achievement, opportunities to do something meaningful, work condition, and the "and" will move you toward the dependent variable, which is employee's intent to leave. And that would be a question. The proposed null and alternate hypothesis, there is no significant relationship between the 3 independent or predicted variables and employee's intent to leave. And the alternate, there is a significant relationship between recognition of one's achievement, opportunities to do something meaningful, work conditions, and employee's intent to leave. Next slide.
All right. With respect to everyone's favorite APA formatting issues, I've essentially divided this brief discussion on those key improvement opportunities for APA into those associated within the body of the prospectus and those associated within the reference section of the prospectus. For those within the body, most common one is, if you can spell it, you're better than I am. With respect to anthropomorphisms and pronunciations, a challenge too. Anthropomorphism essentially is assigning human characteristics to inanimate objects. For example, the study is inanimate, and the study will implies that this study has human characteristics, that it can do this or it will do that. And in lieu of using that anthropomorphism, avoiding it, you could say the researcher intends to address the specific business problem of this study by using a correlational design to identify the significance of the predictor variables with the dependent variable. The next common issue within the body of the prospectus for APA issues is using secondary versus primary references. So, for example, this typically occurs within the conceptual or theoretical framework heading, where they will, where students will state a Smith originally developed his theory in 1937, and then they will put a citation, Brown, 1996. Well, what we want is the original citation to refer to the Smith's original development work, if that's available, assuming it's available. If it's not, then you may well have to certainly refer to secondary references. But when the primary reference is available, always use that versus the secondary references of Brown in a later date. Thirdly, using citations within the body of the study that are not located within the reference setting, or vice versa, having citations, not citations, but references within the reference setting that are not within the body of the prospectus. And this typically occurs from changes, multiple changes, where students will overlook omitting or deleting, I should say, a citation and updating it, but not updating it in the reference section. And a more common one yet is hyphenation, improper use of hyphenation. And what we've done here is provide you with a specific, within the APA manual, location for determining the need for hyphenation or the non-need for hyphenation. So specifically, the case cited here is the use of the term multi-case. Multi-case, not hyphenated within the body, but it requires, if you look at page 99, table 4.2, no hyphen. So the actual proper use is multi-case. And that's a very common, the failure to combine or concatenate those items that are listed within that table. Next, please. In contrast to the body of most common APA formatting anomalies within the reference heading itself start with something as simple as using hard line or paragraph breaks to separate lines within a reference versus using words hanging indent feature. And how do you determine whether they've done that or not? Well, typically, if you copy and paste something, you'll see a space or where they haven't. But the most simple way to do that is to use words, the little icon paragraph, the paragraph symbol, and that will show you hard line breaks or paragraph breaks at the end of lines where they should have used the hanging indent feature. Secondly, issue numbers. Issue numbers, the use of improper use of or inconsistent use of issue numbers within the reference section. Issue numbers are required for journals in which there is consecutive page numbering, and not used for journals in which pagination begins anew from issue to issue within the same volume number, So that's a common one, and we require either consistent use of the issue numbers or throughout the reference section, or the proper use of APA formatting issue numbers as defined within the APA manual. I think it's about page 198 within that section, about the third bullet down. For books, a common problem improvement opportunity is omitting edition numbers for books, or using superscripts for books edition numbers. And we don't use superscripts. We just use small. For example, if you're using 6th edition of Ian edition, the 6th edition, you just use a TH and not use it as a superscript. And finally here for handbooks, not using APA formatting for pagination of those page numbers, are omitting another common issue is omitting the editor's information, identifying the editors and the ED requirement that's required for APA formatting as well. Okay, next please. The final topic that we wanted to, if you will, personalize is to discuss how you might increase the personalization of the feedback and within simultaneously assuring that it refers to the common references that we've identified up front and being predictable. So how do we address those issues, those opportunities? With respect to the personalization and contextual and predictable feedback, anchor your feedback based upon those key references, the handbook, the template, the DBA, for example, Prospectus guide, and reference those when you're providing the feedback. And you can also, that'll provide you a feedback, a basis for justifying your comments should the student challenge those and within their change matrix. Secondly, to facilitate your feedback, and again to assure consistency that maps into those capstone products, use bubble formatted based upon students' comments that we've seen. They appreciate those bubble formatted comments versus inline edits, that type of issue. Bubble formatting, and provide within those comments examples that are relevant to the student's focus area. Provides, again, specific examples as an alternative or a correction as an example to what the student has originally written, and are to support in your comments as well. And to save yourself time, use the software that captures those comments, and you can readily replicate those comments for consistency, such as using Type It In. That's a common software program. I think it costs about $30 for a perpetual license with updates, that type of thing. And that provides consistency as well as an opportunity for you to provide personalized examples and references to which the student can refer to guide them further. And then what I typically do is, after I go through a prospectus or any other capstone product, I provide a review summary just before the title page. And the review summary essentially hits the highlights of the vital few types comments that I've seen consistency through opportunities throughout the prospectus. And within those reviews summaries, again, personalize the comments to, for example, referencing the student's conceptual framework by name, that type of thing, as opposed to the proverbial, this is not right. Okay. And we'd certainly appreciate your comments. So what has worked for you and what has not worked for you, to share those in your feedback based upon your thinking further about corresponding examples for providing the personalized and predictable feedback as well. All right, next, please. In summary, what we've told you and what we discussed with you is use the vital few program resources to guide your review for consistency. Secondly, develop your key improvement opportunities list, those vital few, again, opportunities, and capture those opportunities within, type it in to save you time, and again, provide consistency in your comments. And within those comments, tailor, provided some examples that are tailored to the to the student-specific research topic and method and design as well. And the personalized summaries, again, using and referencing the students and learners specific design and methodology and examples are great. Okay, thank you. And that's the end of my discussion. And for authors' contact information, you'll see here, I'm available as stated here via email, and George is available via the listed email as well. Thank you.